Welcome to our section on the microbiome. The microbiome is the genetic material in all of the microorganisms that share our body space. And the key is that the microbiome is actually the genetic material, whereas the microbiota is that community of microorganisms, that the actual microorganisms. But I'm going to use microbiome and microbiota interchangeably, so don't worry about differentiating between the two. So there's some super cool facts about the microbiome. We have trillions of microorganisms in our body. It's almost hard to comprehend. They outnumber us like 10 to 1 ourselves. 1 to 3% of our body mass could be, made up of microbiome. So easily 10 pounds of, microorganisms that we're carrying around. The microbiomes, they help digest food and they produce essential vitamins and even anti-inflammatory substances. So what will make a microbiome healthy? What do they use for fuel? Well, it's mostly microbiota accessible carbohydrates, or MACs, and this is soluble fiber, foods with soluble fiber. Now, what the bacteria do is they take that fiber, and fiber passes through our system undigested. We can't digest fiber, and we'll talk about that more in the carbohydrate chapter. But they're able to take it, and when I say they, I mean the bacteria, these microorganisms, and they can convert it into short-chain fatty acids. So that's these tiny, tiny little fats, and they use that for energy. And there are other parts of the carbohydrate or the lipids or even the proteins, that maybe we're not digesting that pass through, that they might be able to sop up and then use those for energy. But more importantly, it's the MACs, and these are the prebiotics. So soluble fiber, foods with soluble fiber are what feed the bacteria. They're a prebiotic. So what's a probiotic? A probiotic is the live microorganisms that occur in food. And so you're probably familiar with, yogurt and kefir and sauerkraut, but you've got to be really careful about products like yogurt. They can be so highly processed and all these added sugars that they might, tout that they're healthy, but when you look on the side, you should look for live microorganisms in there. Because they could start with the microorganisms and then they get destroyed during the process of processing or pasteurization. So be careful to read the label. The other one on this list you have to be careful with is pickles. So some pickles are just little cucumbers that have been soaked in a lot of salt water. They haven't gone through any sort of fermentation process. So also be sure to read your labels. Okay, so why do we want a healthy microbiome? Well, it aids in digestion, promotes health, supports the immune system, helps to maintain weight. And you can see on this list at the bottom, it's like there are a lot of studies that show these associations with the microbiome and health. And remember, notice I said association, so these are correlations, but it's really encouraging and interesting, fascinating to think that these bacteria might control all sorts, have an influence on all sorts of diseases, from heart disease to diabetes, and to neurodegenerative diseases. They might, IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome. It might even help control allergies or even help prevent autoimmune diseases. So more research to come on that. That's super exciting. You don't have to memorize this image at all. It's, but I like it. It's from a study in the British Medical Journal, BMJ, and I think one of the keys is this, probiotic intake and dietary fiber intake. Those are the two things that are the most important for a healthy microbiome. And then they noted what, reduced incidence of infection, improved insulin sensitivity, which has to do with diabetes and low gut inflammation. Okay, so what don't we want? Sugar, 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 sugar. So no surprise there. Also, excessive saturated fat intake. We're not going to go into it, but certain drugs like proton pump inhibitors that are used to control GERD and antibiotics. So since we're focusing on nutrition, we'll stay away from the drug component. And I mentioned a study in the Soft Chalk lesson from the University of Washington on mice. And remember, mice are not people. But I like this study because I think it's very representative of the theme I have going in this class about not eating the standard American diet and eating more whole foods. So with two groups of mice, they took each of the groups of mice, and one had a low-calorie plant-based diet, and the other one had a standard American diet. So no shocker, the mice who had the low-calorie plant-based diet ended up being leaner than the ones that were on the standard American diet, and they had more fat. But what's interesting about the study is that they looked at the bacteria, and the longer that the mice stay on the standard American diet, the more it impacted the bacteria in the gut. And it changed the bacterial diversity. And bacterial diversity, or microbial diversity, basically means more species of bacteria. So the greater diversity that we have, the healthier our microbiome. And so that's pretty interesting. The standard American diet, the longer you eat it, the less diverse bacteria you have in your gut. And so it reflects what we've been talking about, staying away from those processed foods and eating more whole foods. It will not only affect your health, but definitely affect the microbiome. So when you look at what we should eat for a healthy microbiome, I don't think anything on here is surprising compared to what we've already talked about, except maybe the fermented vegetables such as sauerkraut or kimchi, and non-starchy vegetables. Increasing, the amount of leafy greens as opposed to potatoes. And also notice that wild salmon, wild-caught fish, grass-fed meat, you can have meat, but it really should be either limited or is not going to come with as much saturated fat as, say, you're going to get with a standard cut of meat of a feedlot cow. So what not to eat? Again, no surprise here, right? Highly processed foods. And what are highly processed foods? They're foods with added sugar, artificial sweeteners, other food additives. But then also look at, fried food and deli meats, and then fruit juice. And we'll talk about this more in the carbohydrate chapters, but drinking fruit juice is like just, throwing back a huge amount of sugar all at once. And our body just really isn't designed for that. So it's better to eat the fruits. Again, starchy vegetables. It's okay to have a potato. It's just fine. And find excellent to have a sweet potato. However, you just don't want to be pigging out on French fries. And I know that seems obvious, but it's the main vegetable that most people eat. So I think we know what to eat. We're looking at a plant-based diet, which definitely has some animal product, can have some animal products in it for sure, and staying away from the standard American diet. And we know there are health benefits associated with that. I think what the microbiome brings is kind of this intermediary, that the microbiome is actually might be creating some of these health effects, which is fascinating. But more research to come. That's just an introduction to the microbiome.